when silence became leverage. Nothing was said, and yet everything shifted. A pause stretched longer than expected, and prices moved. Deals hesitated. Confidence wavered. In a city built on information, silence quietly became one of the most powerful tools of all. London's financial world had grown loud by design. Prices were announced. News traveled fast. Coffee houses buzzed with rumor and speculation from morning until night. Information was everywhere, and speed was rewarded. But as markets accelerated, a strange imbalance emerged. What mattered most was no longer what people knew, but when they knew it. To understand why this mattered, we need to step into a moment when timing began to outweigh truth. Transactions were no longer isolated events. They were linked chains of expectation. A delayed confirmation could ripple through multiple deals. A missing response could freeze capital. In this environment, absence carried meaning. The first signs were subtle. Brokers noticed that holding information, even briefly, changed negotiations. A buyer grew anxious. A lender reconsidered terms. A seller softened demands. Silence created pressure without confrontation. No falsehoods were required. No promises were broken. The effect came from delay alone. As this pattern repeated, certain intermediaries refined it. They learned who needed answers quickly and who could afford to wait. They discovered that pauses could signal caution or confidence depending on context. A withheld reply suggested doubt. A delayed update implied risk. Markets began reacting not to facts, but to the spaces between them. This was a reveal. Silence was no longer neutral. It was directional. It could tilt outcomes without leaving evidence behind. Those who controlled timing gained influence far beyond their visibility. They did not command markets. They nudged them. London was entering a phase where power belonged not only to those who spoke, but to those who knew when not to. And beneath the constant noise of trade, a quieter force was beginning to move the city itself. As silence proved its power, London's financial ecosystem began to adjust around it. Traders no longer reacted only to announcements. They reacted to gaps. A delayed price quote raised suspicion. An unanswered letter suggested instability. Timing became a signal, and silence became data. Those positioned closest to information learned to read these signals instinctively. They watched not just what arrived, but what failed to arrive. In coffee houses and counting rooms, attention shifted from content to cadence. The rhythm of communication itself began shaping belief. Intermediaries refined their role. They understood that controlling information outright was risky and visible. Controlling its release was subtle and defensible. By spacing disclosures, by pacing responses, they could influence perception without ever making a claim. Silence allowed plausible deniability. Nothing false had been said. Nothing could be proven. This advantage created asymmetry. Those inside the timing loop adjusted positions early. Those outside reacted late. Markets began rewarding proximity over insight. Access mattered more than analysis. The city's informational hierarchy quietly reorganized itself around who controlled the pauses. Tension followed. Merchants sensed manipulation, but lacked evidence. Complaints dissolved because silence left no record. Regulators struggled to intervene because absence violated no rule. The market was being shaped by something it could not name. The danger became clear during moments of uncertainty. When conditions were stable, silence barely registered. But during stress, absence amplified fear. A missing confirmation felt catastrophic. A delayed assurance suggested collapse. Panic spread faster through silence than through bad news. London had built a system that assumed information would always arrive. Silence broke that assumption. It forced imagination to fill the void, and imagination rarely chose optimism. What began as a tactical advantage was becoming a systemic risk. The city now depended on timing it could not verify and trust it could not enforce. And as silence continued to move markets without resistance, London edged closer to a moment when absence itself would trigger consequence. The tension peaked when silence stopped being a signal and became a catalyst. A series of delayed confirmations converged at once, freezing transactions across the city. No announcement explained the hesitation. No crisis had been declared. Yet markets stalled as if something terrible had already occurred. Merchants waited. Lenders paused. Prices drifted without anchor. Each participant expected someone else to speak first. Silence fed on itself, multiplying doubt with every passing hour. What had once been a tool wielded by a few intermediaries now enveloped the entire system. The conflict surfaced openly as trust unraveled. Traders accused brokers of engineering uncertainty. Brokers insisted they were merely cautious. Regulators searched for wrongdoing but found none. Silence had obeyed every rule and broken the system anyway. Inside institutions, fear replaced strategy. Decisions were delayed not out of calculation, but paralysis. Nobody wanted to act into the void. Without signals to respond to, action felt reckless. Markets, built on motion, discovered how easily motion could be stopped by absence. The breaking moment came when a routine delay triggered forced unwinding. Positions closed defensively. Capital withdrew preemptively. Losses appeared not because value vanished, but because time ran out. Silence, once subtle, now shouted catastrophe. London confronted a reality it had not anticipated. Information systems are not neutral. They require rhythm to function. When cadence collapses, confidence collapses with it. A market that listens too closely to pauses becomes hypersensitive to nothing at all. The city now faced a choice. Allow silence to remain ungoverned, accepting instability as its price, or redefine the role of absence itself within financial communication. And as consequences spread from hesitation alone, London prepared to confront a force it had never formally acknowledged, but could no longer ignore. The resolution came quietly, shaped by recognition rather than outrage. London did not ban silence. It learned to contain it. Markets began defining expectations around timing, not just content. Responses did not need to be immediate, but they needed to be predictable. Institutions introduced clearer communication rhythms. Deadlines were standardized. Delays required explanation. Absence lost its ambiguity. Silence was no longer allowed to masquerade as information. It became a neutral state again, stripped of its power to distort perception unchecked. Intermediaries adapted. Those who relied on calibrated pauses saw their leverage fade. Others repositioned themselves as coordinators of flow rather than gatekeepers of timing. Influence shifted away from withholding and toward reliability. Trust began rebuilding, not through abundance of information, but through consistency. Markets stabilized. Volatility eased. Confidence returned slowly, anchored in cadence rather than speculation. Participants learned that clarity does not require constant speech, only dependable structure. Silence, when expected, ceased to frighten. London absorbed the lesson deeply. Financial systems do not collapse only from lies or excess. They collapse when the space between signals becomes unpredictable. Absence, left unmanaged, invites imagination. And imagination, under pressure, creates panic. The city moved forward with a new understanding. Power lies not just in words or numbers, but in rhythm. Control the beat, and you steady the system. Lose it, and even nothing can move everything. Subscribe to join the journey.